Welcome to The Disappearing Mind, a unique podcast helping you find clarity and support along your dementia journey. Now, join National Dementia Trainer and Coach Dawn Platt for an all-new episode.
Welcome to the Disappearing Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dawn Platt. We are beginning a series on breaking the stigma of dementia. I am happy, I'm excited. I really want to get this out there. I think that the podcast that we're about to do in this series is really going to be a differentiator to our audience. I think that you're going to learn a lot. You're going to relate to what we're talking about. This first episode, I just want to set it up. I want to set up the daughter. I want to set up my friend. I want to set up someone who has experienced this. It's real, it's raw, and I cannot wait for you to hear it. We're going to talk about when friends turn away, the hidden hurt of the dementia stigma. Welcome again to the Disappearing Mind podcast. This podcast explores the emotional landscape of dementia care. I'm your host, Dawn Platt, and today we're launching this powerful series about stigma. It's the first in the episode, and we're going to dive deep into social rejection that caregivers and families often face after their loved one is diagnosed. Before I introduce our guest today, I want to tell you a little bit about her story. Mary is our guest today. She is a daughter. She cared for her mother with vascular dementia. She oversaw her care and she had to make a lot of decisions. But we're going to hear her personal story of facing judgment. Yes, I said judgment. And social isolation, really social rejection from her mother's own friends. People who once cared deeply about her later seemed to vanish or actually question even her intentions if she and her father were doing the right things. That's really difficult and really hard. And I think that you're going to enjoy this. But let's talk a little bit about the reality of this misunderstanding. We're going to kind of discuss what causes these types of reactions. Could be denial, discomfort, or just a lack of understanding on that person's part or these people's part about dementia. It often leads to assumption that the caregiver is controlling, overacting, or just not doing the right things. Let's go ahead and get started. Again, we want to say welcome to the podcast. I want to tell you that this is going to be an emotional and a beautiful story about dementia. And I'm really excited to get into a whole series about breaking the stigma of dementia. My guest today is Mary. Mary is the daughter of a woman who lived with vascular dementia. We're going to tell her story today, but welcome to the podcast, Mary.
Thank you, Dawn. I'm very glad to be here.
Mary is a devoted daughter whose mother lived with vascular dementia. And rather than receiving understanding and support, which she should have received, she and her father were met with some suspicious judgment and emotional pain from people they once trusted. This particular episode is for anyone who's ever defended their love, their truth, or their caregiving choices. Mary, I am excited to share what you went through. And I want to say to the audience that Mary is very devoted to the truth about this journey and disease. She has a lot to talk about that is going to just change everything. But Mary, I want to thank you for being here today and for your bravery in speaking up. I know that this is probably difficult, but before we get into your story, can you tell us a little bit about your mom?
Sure. So my mom had a stroke roughly 20 years ago. She started to experience various signs of cognitive challenges or dysfunction throughout the last 20 years. She passed away in March of 2025. And in various stages of the years and the journey, she would show from time to time issues that we thought were strange, but nothing too out of the ordinary until probably the last 5 years of her life. And she was a very strong, smart businesswoman, had a ton of friends, and was very much adored by her family. My grandmother, her mother, had passed away from ovarian cancer at 64, and my mother was just 40 or maybe 41. And so really took on as the oldest female in our family, took on a matriarch role very early on in her life with her sister, her brother, and all of my cousins. She surrounded herself quite a bit with people she was just one of those people that was absolutely loved and adored by everyone who knew her. She moved to Florida. We grew up in Wisconsin. She moved to Florida in 1995. So got a little bit distant from friends and family, but not in spirit or heart. She was one of those people that would just keep in touch with everybody on a very consistent basis. Some friends weekly, some friends several times a week. So again, just underscoring the true social network that she had built between our friends and family throughout her life and even to her passing was always a big part of our lives together and hers as well.
Well, your mom sounds like an amazing person, and I personally know that she was. I think she was very successful and a powerful woman. I'll say it that way, that probably made friends wherever she went. When did you receive a diagnosis of dementia or vascular dementia? And what was that moment like for you and your dad?
I received it via medical records that I obtained after she had spent some time in a psychiatric hospital through some behaviors that she was exhibiting towards medical professionals as she was getting deeper into her disease. Unfortunately, she did not want to face what was happening to her and refused official or formal diagnosis. She was not part of a treatment plan. This was just quite literally a situation that was unfolding for her and for the rest of us as time progressed.
So you never really received an official diagnosis from a healthcare professional or a treatment plan. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Tell me what that was like navigating in the early and the middle stages. How did you make decisions?
Well, you couldn't. Quite frankly, it was almost impossible to manage seeing some of the things that were happening. At first, I, as a daughter, was frustrated, worried, angry. There were things that were happening that I questioned and wondered. She was always, being a business person, always very great at technology and computers. We were some of the first people to have technology in our family, and she started to have struggles with technology, email, things like that. Needed a lot of help, but wasn't too overtly obvious until, time progressed.
Let's kind of shift this because I think we really want to talk about that emotional side and share it. I think that families go through this a lot. You've shared that some of your mom's friends started to question the diagnosis. Can you walk us through how that began and what they were saying?
As I had mentioned, most of them were in other states. Most of them were in very distant places and hadn't seen her.
Hmm.
And so they would talk to her on the phone. She became very good at what I've now come to know as showtime, where she would be able to cover a lot of what was going on with her,
Hmm.
a lot of the challenges she was experiencing. She got very good at hiding it to her friends. And since the conversations with them were just maybe an hour or so here and there, they weren't experiencing or living the same kinds of things that my father and I were experiencing. So, because she didn't have a diagnosis, she was a master at masking it with her
Yeah.
friends and my family. And so then that started to cause confusion for them as her personality started to change. She would exhibit anger. She was short fused. She became extremely accusatory, even of family members. When we did visit them, there were several instances that started to occur early on where my cousins were very hurt by some things that she did and said to them, and they couldn't understand why she would do or say those things because their, lives and relationships with her had not ever been like that in the past. So this was all unfolding in a sort of a clandestine way. She was a very prideful person. She was very mortified to think that this was happening to her. And as I started to notice things and felt strongly that maybe this is what was occurring, I tried to speak with her on several occasions, and she would just become absolutely furious with me. And as time went on, accused me of telling her friends that she had dementia. Because I think what was happening is a lot of the friends were catching on that she had something going on. And
Mm-hmm.
perhaps some of them were trying to talk to her about it. I wasn't aware, but the danger that happened was this sort of chasm between her friends who I had known since I was little, and quite frankly, her friends adored me. I was an only child, and I always went to all of the lunches and shopping excursions,
Uh-huh.
and I was around a lot with those friends, and they would always go on and on about what a wonderful young woman I was. And as I became an adult, they just adored and admired my mom and I's relationship. And so, as you mentioned earlier, these people meant a lot to me. They
Sure.
became somewhat like family.
Yeah.
And then, of course, her family too, we were tight with. So there was a lot of confusion because they hadn't been around us and they weren't seeing what was truly going on.
A lot of people do that because they don't really understand that people can confabulate when they have dementia, and especially vascular dementia because of the way it progresses. But I can't imagine how it felt to be doubted. And I know that it wasn't just about the diagnosis or just about the early, it kind of continued on. I mean, tell us, were there decisions you and your dad made that they wondered, even question if you were doing the best thing? How did that go?
Yes. So as time went on, she got angrier and angrier at my father. It started with my father. She was getting confused, I think, and couldn't understand or figure out how to get into her bank accounts. I would assume didn't understand where money was going or coming from, may not even remembered when she spent money. And so it started with accusing my father of stealing money, and then it started her accusing me of stealing money. And then she began accusing us of hurting her, abusing her. It got quite concerning. We had social workers questioning us.
Mm-hmm.
She was calling the police almost daily. And then she would call her friends and tell them we were doing these terrible things. And because she knew how to sort of mask her issues for a long time, they began to believe her because there was only one side of the story. And then she would sort of throw that back at us, and my friends think you're awful. There were situations where she was telling them that I became aware that she was telling them things that I was incredibly embarrassed about or mortified that she would say that. I know my dad had private things she shared with her friends that you just wouldn't normally share with people. So we became very vulnerable, very exposed, and scared, to be honest with you,
Mm-hmm.
because it felt as though it was getting out of our control and beyond what we could manage, trying to convince people that these things weren't true.
You must
And
you
then
must have
it's,
been desperate. I mean, you even had to face this with professionals, with people in the
yes,
field, even with police officers and social workers and people who should have known better or looked at the history. I mean, you must have been desperate. How did you cope with that?
it was frightening, to be honest, because I had heard of situations where some people are arrested. It becomes a he said, she said situation. And when friends know their friend as a certain way
Mm-hmm.
or have seen her in such a competent fashion her whole life, they don't. believe it. And I think they also don't want to believe it just because it's a scary thing to think about.
It is
So there
scary.
was probably their own denial and then her denial and the fact that maybe a lot of these friends and family hadn't seen us for quite some time. But it was frightening. And I will say the police most often were the most trained and aware. I think they came so often and they were part of so much that they knew what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
They became very empathetic to my father and I. Social workers also seemed fairly trained. Doctors, not so much. Her doctor, I called him no less than 3 times. I sent an email. My dad called several times, no
Mm-hmm.
response. He told my mom that he wasn't a social worker. He couldn't get involved in these issues. I at one time called social work and reported her and said, I need help. And they told me to call a concierge doctor, and I did. But at the end of the day, I mean, she wasn't having any of this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I was really running up against a lot of walls, and my dad and I were feeling incredibly isolated and unsupported.
Yeah, your mom actually became paranoid and accusatory, and she was really projecting on you and your dad to probably as a coping mechanism for her own dementia. But was
Yeah.
there ever a moment when someone really close to your mom implied that you were overreacting or even hurting her?
Yeah. So some family knew what was going on, but other family was really questioning and becoming extremely suspicious of us.
Right.
And then we had some friends as well, and even more local friends, which got very difficult because there was a little bit more power there to create hardship for us. And at the end of the day, it was all well intentioned. They're coming at it as, gosh, my friend is miserable and sad and her family's treating her terrible, right? So it was all well intentioned. I
Mm-hmm.
know that. But I think in hindsight, I wish that someone had reached out to us. We did have friends every now and then reach out to us, but I didn't feel I could reach out to them because my mom was always saying, "You're going, you're telling all my friends that I have dementia,"
Yeah.
and accusing me. So I felt again like I was sort of almost like a gag order, if you
Yeah,
will. Like
yeah. Well, you
I couldn't tell the truth.
were very close to your mom. So there must
Yes,
have
very.
been
Yeah.
a lot of guilt going on. I mean, you probably even questioned the reality of some of the stuff you were facing because it's like, whoever thinks that way, right? And you were close to her and you did respect your mom. And now all these things are happening that you might expect to happen in middle school or something like that, where a friend situation, but not with your mom. And I remember you sharing even some of the phone calls you got, and they were into the night where people were calling. And the last thing you needed to do was to deal with people outside of the reality you were actually going through. I can't imagine looking back. Is there something in particular that you wish that these people knew, whether it's friends and family, that could make this different for others? I mean, dementia is ever so prevalent. So this is not isolated, but is there something that you would have done differently or said differently to snap them out of the unreality they were in?
Well, it unfolded, and I had faith that over time it would it would become clearer because I had the sad reality that my mother, I knew my mother was going to decline.
Yes.
And I figured eventually some of these things would become more apparent to other people. So I guess in a way there was a patience game there. What I got most frustrated by was well-intended friends, first of all, who would speak to me as if I was a child. And, I'm in my 50s and they would speak very condescendingly to me. If you would only show her more compassion, if you would only be a little bit more empathetic about her situation. And
Oh
the
my.
worst one, if you would only show her more love.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my
And
goodness.
and that was like a match to a fire of guilt because I knew I was doing enough, but it's just something about people who you've known your whole life, who've known you and you were little growing up and now you're an adult woman and they're speaking to you like again kind of talking down at you and then acting like, if you would just do a little bit more or if you could just, be a little better at loving her, maybe, you'd love this right out of her or something. And I guess
Yes.
it's like the well-intentioned, maybe I'm sure they just didn't know what to do or say,
Yes.
but it was that judgment of not taking the time to truly ask me what was going on. I think out of, her hundreds of friends, I had three people actually call me and say, "What's going on with your mom?"
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, my dad and I were just living with this terrible stigma. That's why it's really very much part of this topic because
Absolutely.
we felt that we were walking around with this scarlet letter, if you will. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if that's
Yeah.
appropriate for this, but like we're the public enemies number one is what one and two is what I used to say.
I mean, I know this is true because I am a subject matter expert. I didn't go through this. I don't know that I would have tolerated it like you did. I don't know that I could
Yeah.
have done that, Mary. There is an emotional weight that I want to validate when it comes to being
Mhm.
accused or doubted while you're already navigating such a heartbreaking scenario. I just
Yes.
want people to hear this and friends and family. If you don't have something good to say and you're not really sure the entire scenario, don't say anything at all. The emotional weight on top of the emotional weight of making decisions that you are going through is enormous. And we're
Yeah.
talking to people like you and I today. We're saying, hey, find things you can say, find ways to address or cut these people off. I mean, there becomes a weight. And you did so well, Mary. I know you didn't feel like you did, but you carried so much weight. And we're going to talk at some point about after that's not there anymore, but you really did. You were getting it from all sides. You were getting the paranoia, the accusations of your mother's own disease speaking to you, as well as those who should have been comforting you weren't there. And I want people to hear how valuable an old friend can be. That,
Yes, and there were two of her friends that understood the situation and kept in contact with me, eventually writing me frequently, checking in how things were going, checking in on my mom, and that just meant the world to me. It really did. You don't need a lot of people to
yeah,
support you,
yes, that's true.
but it was just enough, and it was her friends and, our family that meant the most to me. I mean, obviously, I appreciated all my friends.
Yes.
I expected them to support me. They knew exactly, all the details of what was going on, and they really did a wonderful job of supporting me. And I also am very fortunate that my father and I partnered together. I feel for families where there's familial conflict,
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
and it's just a road to nowhere when you're all arguing. He and I formed a very we were always close. I mean, again, I'm an only child. It was just the three of us. We were always incredibly close. I did vacations with my parents every year. Even after I got married and had my son, we were always very tight. So this was a very devastating and difficult road for us to have one of our family member turning against us in this way, but we had to band together and partner together. And there were times when I had to tell my dad, leave the house. If she's becoming that way or she's saying things, leave the house, do what you can to take care of yourself. And I often had to help him understand the stigma. He
Yes.
also had these relationships with these friends and was mortified at the accusations. It's the farthest thing from anything, any kind of behaviors my father and I would have ever engaged in. It was very difficult to be so far away
Mm-hmm.
and feel like people that had known us for 50, 60, 70 years were now maybe looking at us in this terrible light. So I would say you need to reach out to people if you feel there's something going on or it doesn't add up.
Mm-hmm.
And you should do that anyway in any relationship.
Yes.
Don't be afraid to ask the questions. There's so many ways you can do it without doing it in person, even or on the phone if you're uncomfortable, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's just a text or a Facebook message. In fact, that's really how some of this happened with my mom is I was Facebook messaging two of her friends. It just became a great support and they were there until the end. Not enough people did. And I do want to just say there was all the way into the funeral, we were really wrestling with this, showing up back in our hometown, facing people and wondering what they were going to think about us
Oh
and how
my.
we were going to be received was incredibly difficult for my dad in particular. I had come to accept it
Yes.
and I knew that I did everything I could and that I was not the person that she said I was. And I knew that they knew this and I was going to go in there with confidence. And my father had a lot of confidence as well, but I do think maybe the level of relationships he had with them, they're much longer, much deeper. It was very difficult for him even through the funeral. But there's light at the end of this. Everybody showed up and was very kind. And I had reassured him that anybody that would come to the funeral was there to support us, and they were.
What a great
And
story. I can't imagine all the way to the funeral, all the way to the funeral that this followed. It just shows what a loving family and concerned family that you have in this situation. I do want to
yeah,
say, Mary, that, and to the audience, I want to normalize the fact that vascular dementia can fluctuate. Lucid moments occur in all types of dementia. You'll have periods, but vascular is very different. I want to clarify that this podcast isn't about every dementia and you can expect that this is going to happen, but oftentimes it will in certain types of dementia. So lucid moments do not mean that someone isn't impaired cognitively. So I want to say that. And then I want to talk about confabulation a little bit or misremembering something, which is kind of what we're talking about here when we're talking about the accusations and the retelling of stories in reality. They can do that inaccurately because dementia impacts that recall in their brain. But it's really hard to put into words what it feels like to be doing your best, often sacrificing sleep, time, money, and your own peace, only to be told that either through rumor or directly that you might be wrong or you might have made a wrong decision. Mary, I think you've done that so well today. I want to ask you this last question before we start closing. What would you say to another family going through this who may feel isolated because they're dealing with this? What advice do you have for them?
the first thing I would say is seek help for yourself through therapy. I think it's really important that you have somebody that supports you that is not in your family or friend group and it has a professional perspective to speak to about all of the situations that, you're going to face through dementia. The second thing is seek out and support the people who support you. It doesn't pay to argue or fight with people. And some people are just not going to understand. And I learned that I was shocked. I thought even by sending people articles and links, and I got very much into trying to convince, and it doesn't work. Some people you just have to move on and know that for whatever it is, the disease does progress and it did come to light for everybody that I had struggled with as well. And the third thing I would say is when it's over, try to make peace with those that may have misunderstood. I actually did reach out to every single person who had misunderstood situations.
Mm-hmm.
And I made it actually, when my mother passed away, I did finally explain to everybody what had been going on. There was just way too much shame around it, and I was worried about protecting my mom. I wish I could have had that opportunity to be more open and transparent. Perhaps I should have done it sooner. But I did feel strongly it needed to be shared after she had passed away. And I think once I did that, it might have connected dots for a lot of people. Some people started coming out of the woodwork. They called me. They said they had suspected. They were sorry they hadn't reached out. And I even got apologies for not supporting me and believing her and thinking all those things were going on, which was incredibly validating and is helping me to move on from all of that stigma that we were dealing with.
Well, thank you for your bravery today, Mary, and being here on the podcast and sharing this story. I know it's going to be impactful to our listening audience. I want to thank everyone for joining us today on The Disappearing Mind. This episode, if it resonated with you, please share it, subscribe, share it with a family member or friend or someone who might be struggling. Join us next time as we continue our series on the dementia stigma. We're going to explore diagnosis, what happens on this dementia journey. But I want to say until then, Mary, thank you. Be kind to yourself. And remember, this journey is not yours to walk alone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for the Disappearing Mind podcast. We hope it's helped you find clarity and support along your journey. Be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode, visit our website to suggest future topics, and share the podcast with friends and family.